Okay, I am excited to welcome to you my next guest, who I also consider a dear friend, Michael Rodenberg. Michael serves as the board of director for Murakami Corporation Japan, as well as is the CEO of Murakami Manufacturing USA Incorporated. Michael holds a bachelor's degree in Japanese from Brigham Young University and an MBA in global management from the University of Phoenix. Over the past 25 years, Michael has worked at several automotive component suppliers with assignments in Japan, China, and various locations in the US. Since joining Murakami in 2011, Michael has taken a specific interest in helping young people make the jump from school to the workforce. He currently serves as the board chair for the Japanese American Society of Kentucky and is the immediate past board chair for the Kentucky Workforce Center. In November of this year, he will release his first book, Bridge the Gap: How Leaders Can Revitalize Broken Organizations. I have leaned on Michael for years now as a mentor, as a confidant, as a friend. Anytime we're facing big issues, I call Michael to get his opinion. I'm excited for you to hear from his personal story today. And Michael, appreciate your bravery in being with us. Please welcome to the stage, Michael Rodenberg.
Good morning, everyone. Beth, I apologize for jumping in during your presentation, but you know, when you're, I guess, kind of like a Jimmy Fallon and you have a host or your show, I'm in the back just waiting to get out there, so I couldn't keep myself in the green room. But it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. And I'm going to share a little presentation with you here, if I can get up and going. Let me do this real quick, and we will get started. Hopefully everyone can see what I've got going on here. We'll just check and see. So anyway, my name is Michael Rodenberg, want this best said, and it is a pleasure to be with all of you today. I'm going to talk about the things we never see as it relates to substance abuse and mental illness. So in May 9th of 2018, for me, it was a typical day. I was getting up to go to the airport. For those that do know me, know that I travel to Asia quite often. And I've probably been to Japan 100 times. And so for me, it was just a normal trip overseas where you fly. It takes 24 hours to get there. You get there and you have one meeting and you turn around and come back. So for me, it was a very important day because I had to be in Japan for a specific meeting. So I go to the airport, I go to check in, and the person at the counter says to me, "Mr. Rodenberg, I apologize, but your flight has been canceled and you're not going to make your connecting flight to Tokyo." I said, "Well, you know what? No big deal. You know, I fly so often that these things happen." So I asked her, I said, "Could you just check if there's any other opportunities?" And she started to look and realized that, well, there wasn't any on their airlines. And fortunately, because of my flight status, I could ask and say, "Well, maybe could you put me on another airline?" And she looked at that too. And after searching and trying all kinds of options to move me around the world to get to Tokyo by the time I needed to make my meeting, she said, "You know what? It looks like it's not going to work out today." That was an interesting thing because I've never had that happen. Usually I could get there, but I took that as, okay, well, maybe I'm not supposed to travel today. And thought, okay, well, I'll call Japan. I can't make it, which was fine. And it just so happened that morning, my wife was going to be up in Louisville as well. And so we grabbed my son and daughter-in-law and went out for breakfast. As I was at breakfast, I got a phone call. The phone call was my father, who lived in Phoenix. And at the time, there's a pretty significant time difference. And when he called, he said to me, "Son, we have lost Brian." Brian is my 17-year-old nephew. And my first thought was, where did you lose him? He's a teenager. Growing up as a kid, I was always getting lost. So I thought, well, where is he? And he went on to say that, no, Brian's no longer with us. My heart sunk. But I was grateful for the fact that my bags were packed. I was 10 minutes away from the airport, and I was able, within a few short hours, to be with my family. I think that was divine intervention, and I'm grateful that I could be there with them. I'd like to share a short video about Brian.
Last pitch he threw was unbelievable. It was to send us to the semifinal game. The game's 5-4, bases loaded. We knew when the game was on the line, we would put Brian in, we didn't have to worry.
Good night! Yeah!
You know, he went to bed that night, he walked in my room, he said, "Hey Mom, I love you, see you tomorrow." And I think, oh God, if I just walked in his room, you know, just checked on him one last time. He was sitting up with his hat on and his glasses on and the TV on, and so I just think he just probably just fell asleep and that was it. You know, he had just pitched the game of his life. We had just talked about college and the opportunities that were being handed to him. He was just, there are no words to describe that kid.
You hear the opioid epidemic every day. You hear overdoses all the time, but you always think, hey, those are the junkies in Phoenix. You never think, hey, that could be my friend.
Last year alone, we seized enough fentanyl to kill about 85 million people. The American people want the product, and so they'll make it. That's really the issue behind it. We've got a significant demand problem in the country, and as long as there's a demand for that, the cartels are going to take advantage of that. These pills are manufactured in somebody's garage in Mexico, and that's why we see a lot of these overdose deaths from kids that weren't necessarily what we would call opiate addicts, but they were at a party or a buddy gave them a pill and say, hey, this is an oxy, man. It's a Mexican oxy, though it's really strong. You're going to feel really good. So they did what kids do, and they pop a pill, and unfortunately it had 7 grams of fentanyl in it instead of 1, and they didn't survive it.
So many families don't want to share it. I said over and over, if we save one family from this pain and horrific tragedy, then we have done what we needed to do. To tell Brian's story is the only way to honor him, and to see for other parents, it's okay to talk about this. Let's have open and honest conversations, and let's figure out a way to get this stuff off the street.
It was really hard for me, you know, to go out there to pitch one of the biggest games I ever pitched in. And I came off the field crying. You know, I looked up in the sky. I told him that I did this for you. And that's where he wanted us to be in the state championship game.
You know, every time I watch that, I get emotional. That's my nephew. But you know, Brian's story is not unique. For us as a family, it's very personal, and I would say it's almost very sacred to us about what happened from his passing to the days and weeks that followed. But unfortunately, that year, almost 67,000 individuals in the Americas here died from some type of drug-involved overdose. That's 184 people per year. Excuse me, 184 people per day. And if you step back and think about that, and we have, you know, we were fortunate. Brian's memory will always be with us. We have something that we can share that tells his story that could hopefully help someone else. But there's 67,000 other families that went through the same difficult and challenging times that we did. And many of those stories will never be told. One of the things that we learned through this process, and we started to study about it as a family, is that this opioid epidemic that we've seen has really developed into a serious problem. You know, in the 2000s, we all know about how there was a rise in prescribed opioids, and there became an addiction, and then the government got involved and they started to shut down these pill farms and stop these doctors from prescribing all these pills. But like the individual said on the video, the market will drive things. And so all of a sudden there was a change to heroin, and people started to take heroin because it was cheap, it was easy. But then, as any good business operation would figure out, the cartels stepped in and said, you know, we can make a synthetic opioid very cheaply, and we can export it. And as you can see now, synthetic opioids have taken over the market, and they're very readily available. What we learned from this experience, in addition to that, was how this problem that we face is something that we don't like to talk about. When we step back and think about it, when this happened to our family, there were a lot of questions. And as you can imagine, because Brian was so well known in the Phoenix area, that all of the problems that are associated with this are forced onto the family. For the instance, you know, because the media got involved, there are all these questions. So, you know, why did this happen? How did this happen? And you can imagine my sister and brother-in-law, how they felt as, oh, this is my fault. How could we have let this happen? So it was a very difficult time. But as we got together as a family, we started to talk and we started to open up. And as we opened up, I found out something I had no idea. And that was Brian was struggling with a mental illness. He had been treated or was being treated for some depression and anxiety. And I didn't know that. We didn't talk about it as a family. We didn't know that he had that problem and he was going through that. And so all of a sudden, when we found out about that, we started to talk as a family that did this lead to the choice he made? Prior to this, I asked my sister, I said, Melissa, if I were able to talk to this group, what is something you'd want me to share with them? And she said this, teenagers don't talk. She had a very good relationship, both her and her husband, with her son, Brian. They talked a lot. They knew that Brian had been to a doctor. They knew that he had been receiving medication. But like any other teenager, how are you doing? I'm doing fine. Everything's okay. I have no problems. But for those of us that have dealt with a mental illness, we know that when we go through this process of taking medication, that it can take time. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And if we don't communicate to a doctor that we're having issues, it can lead to a lot of problems. And in the case of teenagers, we know that a lot of them are struggling with some form of mental illness. And because of that, if they don't get the proper care, if the medication they're taking is not working, the probability of them stepping out and seeking other ways to self-medicate will happen. Not only has my sister Melissa dealt with the death of her son Brian, but her older son, who at a younger age was diagnosed as being bipolar, has struggled as well. He's been in and out of rehab multiple times. And, you know, they're a typical family. In fact, my sister, she is a principal, in fact, started her own charter school. And my brother-in-law, they're great people. They've cared, loved, and taken care of their children, but something drove their children to these choices. You know, although drug use and addiction can happen at any time during a person's life, drug use typically starts in adolescence, and it's a period when first signs of mental illness commonly appear. So what is mental illness? You know, for me growing up as a kid, mental illness was, oh my gosh, it's that crazy person. It's the person that's in a straitjacket or in an asylum. They're the people that do horrible things. That is what mental illness is. And there's a stigma attached to mental illness that many of us don't like to talk about, and especially in the older generations. We just don't talk about it. This is something that is a discussion that we don't need to have, because someone just has a problem, and you know, if you do the right things, you can fix it. For years, I thought that, you know, if you had a mental illness, if you had depression or anxiety, you could exercise it away, you could pray it away, you could just get up and be better. But that's not the case. Mental illnesses are a health condition involving changes in emotion. And that is something that a lot of people don't recognize. This is a brain issue. And as a brain issue, it is something that can be addressed. We also don't like to talk about the fact of this. 1 in 5 adults experience some form of mental illness. Now, I'm not sure exactly how many people are on this conference today, but if there's 100 of us, that means 20 of us in the room have some form of mental illness. 1 in 24 may have a serious mental illness. So that's maybe 4 or 5 of us. And 1 in 12 have a diagnosable substance use disorder. That's the data. So we know it's a significant issue in our country. But mental illness is nothing to be ashamed of. It is a medical problem just like heart disease and diabetes. When people begin to understand that, it allows them to step back and say, hey, I can address this. That's why there are psychiatrists. These are doctors that focus on the brain. No different than going to a surgeon or a general practitioner. They all have specialties that they have been trained in to help us with our physical problems. So let me share with you my story. When Brian passed away, it was an eye-opener for me. And the reason why is because as I listened to what he had been dealing with, it made me reflect back on when I was a child and actually a teenager. When I was a teenager, I struggled with a lot of dark and scary thoughts. Suicide was something that I battled with day in and day out. I never attempted it. I never thought I would do it, but I had those thoughts every single day. And I thought, well, I guess everybody has these thoughts. And if they do, then, I guess you just have to work through them. And what I found is that there were times when I was extremely energetic, I was positive, and there were times when I would just really sink. As I continued on through my high school and college and early career, I put all my energy in wanting to succeed. I wasn't the most successful or popular kid in high school. In fact, I was probably one of those kids that no one really knew existed. But as I got out of that environment, I thought, I'm going to make something of myself. I want to be an international businessman. I want to be able to travel the world. I want to do all these different things. And so I put all my energy and effort into that. That was kind of my form of self-medication. It allowed me to get the highs that I needed to be able to deal with the feelings that I was experiencing. It wasn't until I was in my 30s. And what was interesting is my father, who had been in the banking world for years, lost his job. And he'd been quite successful. And so, of course, as a 30-year-old that knew everything and had all this experience, I was telling my father, I said, okay, you've lost your job. You just pick yourself up and you move forward. For an extended period of time, he struggled. He couldn't move. He couldn't get out of bed. He couldn't get back on the horse and move forward. And I kept thinking, why can't he do that? What's wrong? Why anybody can do that, especially he has all these talents and skills, but he just didn't do it. It wasn't until just a little after that one morning I woke up and I couldn't move. I physically could not move my body. I laid on the bed and I'm like, what is going on? But I was scared. I was anxious. And as I explained this to my wife, she says, you need to go see a doctor. You need to go see a psychiatrist. And my first thought was, hey, that's for mental people. But she was right. I did. I went to go see a psychiatrist. And the doctor, probably took 10 or 15 minutes and talked to me and said, okay, let's just prescribe something. They did. And I started to feel better. But the mistake I made is as I started to feel better, and of course I went back and I got checked. I said, yeah, everything's okay. I'm doing good. No different than a teenager. I thought, okay, since I'm better, I can get off this medication. I can stop. And I did. Now, no one told me that if you stop cold turkey, that can cause significant problems. But I thought, it's just part of the transition. And so I got back on my path of making work my addiction because I dove into it that much harder. And when I came here to Kentucky, I started to have those same symptoms again that got to be extreme with the negative thoughts and not really wanting to be here. And so I went to my general practitioner. He prescribed some medication. I felt a little better. Then I felt worse. He tried another medication. That didn't work. And he tried a third medication, and I went off the deep end. It was horrible for me, and it scared me to death. And so I stopped once again. I was like, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to take any medication, because every time I do, something happens. And that went on for a period of time until earlier this year. Once again, things got so bad that I was really having a difficult time functioning. Now, the thing is that no one knew this. No one around me knew what I was going through personally. In fact, in my role as a CEO, I work with a lot of my team, and there's been situations where I've counseled them and said, hey, you're having a difficult time. You probably ought to go see a doctor about this. And I think it will help you. And I've actually helped other individuals, but I've never really wanted to help myself. But this time I had to. And once again, at the advice of my wife, like she did probably 15 years ago, I went and saw someone that deals in the brain. This time, when I walked in the room and I talked to the individual and I said, you know, this is my life. I'm so fortunate. My blessings are huge. I run a company. I have an incredible family, have great, amazing grandkids. I'm able to do whatever I really want to do. Why am I so miserable? And why do I go through these swings? And she looked at me and she said, you know, most people operate in kind of a small wave of emotions. She goes, you're extreme. You go up and then you come down, and you go up and you come down. And you know what? You have a mood disorder. I'm like, well, I've always been told I had anxiety or depression. She said, well, a mood disorder is different, and I'll prescribe some medication to you. And she did. And by doing that, she put me on a medication that dealt directly with my illness. Since that time, I have felt great. I still have ups and downs, but I felt 10 times better. And it's funny because through this process and talking with one of my younger children, we came to the understanding that he struggled with the same thing. And I look back, I wish 30 years ago that someone would have helped me, but we've been able to help him. And then through this process, because he's one of these younger, really smart kids that like to learn everything, I thought, okay, I just have a mood disorder. I didn't really know. I thought, okay, that's good enough. I talked about it. I've even written a paper about it and shared with everybody, hey, I'm a CEO that has a mood disorder. But my kid's like, Dad, your mood disorder is bipolar. I'm like, oh, now it has a label. I always thought someone with bipolar was, oh, well, that's someone that has such extremes that they just do crazy things. That's not the case, but that's something I have. And so through this experience, the things that I want, hopefully you can take away from this, is that first of all, the drug epidemic is that. The little blue pill that killed my nephew is real. It is something that is easy accessible. And so as adults, as teachers, as professionals, as parents, we have a responsibility to tell our children that, hey, in the past we used to say, just say no. But today we need to say, just say no, because if you take a pill, it could kill you. That's the kind of talk that we need to have with our children. I'm a big believer in bridging the gap. And there's a gap between the stigma related to mental illness and the fact that it's just a brain issue. We need to get there. If we can get there, we can help so many people and hopefully get them on the right path to get the treatment and the medication that they need so that they don't have a desire to self-medicate. And by understanding that link between mental illness and between substance use disorder, we can always also step back and look at those individuals that are struggling right now and recognize, how did they get there? You know, they're just not a junkie. They're not a bad person. They're someone that had an issue, and because they couldn't get the help they needed, they reached out on their own to try and fix their own problem. So hopefully through this conference, you'll be able to gain information and knowledge to help you in the various areas you work. It's been a pleasure to be with all of you today. And if there are any questions, Beth or Emily, I'll be more than happy to take those.
Thank you, Michael. I've got to hear that one other time before, and it's hard. It's kind of hard to catch my breath in the bravery of your story. So one, thank you for opening up. So if you have questions for Michael, please put them in the question and answer box here in Zoom, and we will get them. We'll get them to come in. While we're waiting for those to come in, I do have a question, Michael. If we could just chat for a little bit. Sure. I know when you came out on this, I mean, you're the first American CEO nominated to the Japanese board for Murakami. You're a CEO of a major company here on behalf of America for Murakami. Coming out of this could not have been an easy decision. So one, I just applaud you in that bravery, because I think when people like you speak up, stigma gets broken. But can you walk us through a little bit of like what inspired it? Like when I heard you say this, last year, I just kind of fell out of my chair, and just hope and admiration. So talk to us. How'd you get there with that decision?
I look back, there was an event that took place. I was at church one Sunday, and someone had come to speak about mental illness. And as this individual talked about it, is the first time that she said, this is a brain issue. Your brain is broken. It's not operating properly. There's things that, that signals in your head that have to operate properly. And because of your situation, they're not working. And all of a sudden it clicked. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm not crazy. Because I was afraid if I came out and said something that, well, how could it impact my career? How could it impact those around me? Oh my gosh, this guy's a crazy person. And there was a fear with that. I had a fear. I was scared to come out and say it. But when she said that, it clicked. I'm like, okay, I have a very good friend that has diabetes. He's extremely successful. His daughter has diabetes. She's extremely successful. And I'm like, I don't ever judge them. Right. I never raise the issue like, hey, you've got insulin. Oh my gosh, you're a horrible person.
Right.
And so I think that was for me the biggest changing point.
That's really well said, because we don't, this is all disease related, and we don't assign the same stigma to substance use disorder, mental wellness that we do to other diseases. So what was the aftermath like? I remember, was it about 8 months ago, you pushed a big blog out on LinkedIn and kind of just put it out there. What was the aftermath like of that?
I was surprised on how much positive response I received.
Yeah.
There were several individuals that came to me privately afterwards and said, thank you, because as leaders of their own organization, they were struggling. And they were scared to say something. In fact, some of them still struggle with wanting to talk about it because there is such a stigma. But I was really grateful for the fact that so many people came out and said, finally somebody said something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know when you mentioned, you made the incredible point about your nephew when you said he was also suffering from some of his own mental disorders and challenges. And, so many of us that suffer from addiction have a co-occurring disorder with some sort of mental wellness issue that we need to get taken care of, often goes overlooked. And then our disease really kicks in for substance use disorder, which leads to very bad things, such as very high levels of incarceration. What do you think we need to do? I mean, I know when I came out, I was scared to death on my own recovery. I came out last year and was like, hey, I'm an alcoholic and I've been sober for over 6 years, almost 7 now. It's terrifying. It's still terrifying for me to say it. But I feel like it's almost our duty, because we have this position of privilege and the stage to share those stories. What do you think we need to do for the ones that don't have the support and don't have the stage that you and I have?
Well, I think first of all is that we need to use that stage. The more that we are open and share, and in fact, I remember when you shared with me about being an alcoholic, I'm like, what? Beth, an alcoholic? And I think that's something else that's important to remember, that this is who we are.
Yep.
And it's important to share who we are and not to be ashamed of it. And I think that's the thing that we need to help individuals But the only way that's going to happen is that as a society that we really start to change the stigma. And that's going to be through education. It's going to be through open communication, sharing this and talking about it at a much younger age. This needs to be talked about in elementary schools and in middle schools, because the kids coming up, the mental illness that they're going to deal with is going to be probably 10x of what we've had to deal with just because of the fact of what they're going through right now. And we need to take that into consideration. And for the older individuals, which we have got to just, talk about it. That's it. I mean, and then when we run into people that are struggling, we see them struggling, it's important to just ask, what are you dealing with? And stop from this, hey, are you exercising? Are you, actively involved in your faith? Are you, all these things that we've always done. My favorite one is, oh, you can pray it away. It's like, oh, you don't pray this away. I'm like, I've been told that many times. I'm like, I've even told that to family members. I'm like, you're a freaking idiot.
We got a really good comment from Ashley, and I think you made a great point too. Ashley McCarty says, you inspire me to keep telling my story. You just crushed the stigma. Thank you for being so open. It's not like a broken bone. You can't see it, but that doesn't make it any less real. And she says, hashtag, I am a suicide survivor. And I think that's one thing we really need to do is help business leaders and HR leaders understand that, the point you made earlier, if somebody's on insulin for diabetes, we applaud that, and so as business leaders, we have health benefits to support employees. And when they come into our office and say, I've got mental wellness issues, I need help, or I am addicted and I need help, I suffer from substance use disorder, we have to pull out those benefits and those arsenal of tools to help them in the same way like you made earlier with the insulin. We got another question in from James Cottle that says, I'm impressed with how comfortable you are in speaking about this, Michael. What is your message to individuals who are afraid to discuss their mental wellness issues?
Just like for me, it took 30 years. And it was a long, painful road of ups and downs. It's hard to say, well, what do you do to encourage that? But I think that, what has to happen is that people that understand that these individuals are going through those challenges, you have to be there for them. That's the only way. For me, I had my spouse that was there to help coach me through the process. She had to live with me. My addiction, I didn't do drugs. I didn't do alcohol. My addiction was work. And it screws things up if that's all you do. And so she was able to recognize, hey, this is a problem. And she was willing to be patient and coach me and be there for me during this process. And I think that's what individuals need. They have to have that support system. They have to have someone that's unconditionally there for them to feel comfortable enough to come out and face the issue. If you don't have that, people are going to just continue to do what they do. And I think that's one of the problems we have in society today is there's so many people that don't have that one person to be there for them.
Absolutely. I agree. And so as neighbors and as coworkers and as business leaders, we have to learn how to be that person. Michael, it means so much to us in Kentucky that you would choose to share this story with us today, this very sensitive, very hard story, I know for you with the loss of your nephew, Brian, and thinking of your sister. Our thoughts and prayers are with your family. And I know you really carry on his name and his honor and what you shared with us today, and showing other business leaders, quite frankly, how it's done, that when we can get over this when we shine a light on it. So thank you. Any last words for the group before you go?
Beth, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for here because of your interest in this very, very important area of focus at the moment. Just like I said in the beginning, that these are the things we don't see. And if we don't start to look underneath the surface, we're going to miss opportunities to really help people. So I would just encourage you to, as you look around, you'll find those that need your help. And if you're willing to just be there for them, you'll be a bigger help than you'll ever realize. And so that's it. Beth, thank you again. You're awesome. This group is awesome. And I know Ashley made a comment earlier, and I'd have to say that Ashley and Sonia both have been a great inspiration in the work that they're doing. And that probably helped me a lot too, to really have the courage to talk about my own issues. So thanks everybody, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Michael, for your leadership. Thank you so much. I wish we were all in a room, because I know we'd be giving you a standing ovation right now. So please, I hope you feel it, even through these Zoom wavelengths, but we are definitely all just thankful and grateful. So have a great day, Michael. We'll talk soon.
Success with the conference. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you for so many of you that put the questions and the comments in the chat. Please keep that level of engagement going. I saw some really kind comments coming in from Rena Sharp and some of our friends here today. So please keep the engagement. We're all living on Zoom. So let's stay connected virtually through chats, through the Wahova app, and through answering those questions. Keep those coming for our speakers throughout the day. So this is our first break. If we were together, you would have access to a hot cup of coffee. So I do hope that you can go find one in your break room or kitchen or wherever you're coming from. We are going to take a break. We will reconvene at 9:55 a.m. It started right at 10 a.m. So don't come any later than 10 a.m. Let's be here to get the next session started. And we will see you after this short break. Thank you so much.